All right, let's go over to Josh Lipton with those numbers.
All right, Apple's numbers just crossing. Let's get right to it. Q2 EPS $1.65. The street was at $1.62. That's a beat. Revenue $95.4 billion versus expectations of $94.59 billion. So beats there on the top and the bottom. Top line grew about 5%. Gross margins clock in at 47.1. Let's get to the segments. iPhone $46.84 billion. That is versus expectations of $45.94 billion. Services $26.64 billion. Street was at $26.72 billion. Mac $7.95 billion. iPad $6.4 billion. Wearables, home and accessories $7.5 billion. Greater China, now that comes in at $16 billion. Consensus was more around $16.8 billion. Now front and center for Apple investors this quarter, we know it's tariffs. What is Apple's messaging going to be there? Its strategy, its game plan. Apple is saying wait for the conference call, which is going to start shortly at 5 p.m. Eastern for that. As well as we know, we're waiting for guidance. We'd expect to hear more about that on the call as well. I did get the chance to speak to Apple's CFO, Kevin Perek, about the quarter. Just give you those comments. On the quarter itself, he said, new all-time high for Apple's install base of active devices. Kevin mentioned Apple iPhone revenue up 2%. iPhone active install base, he said, all-time high. Double-digit growth for upgraders, he noted. All-time revenue record on services, pointing out that was up 12%. On iPhone, in Q2, one question that's top of mind for the street, for investors, did Apple see evidence that consumers were buying iPhones to get ahead of those tariffs, front-loading, so to speak? Kevin Perek telling us for the March quarter, we don't believe we saw any evidence of pull-ahead demand for iPhone. On China, I mentioned that comes in at $16 billion. Street was close to 16.8. Asked Kevin Perek for some more color there. Perek saying December quarter, we were down 11%. His point being that they are seeing sequential improvement because now you're down minus 2%. I asked him about local competition. Some analysts think, listen, is that a factor? Has that become more intense over there? Kevin Perek said it's always been intense. China has always been a very competitive market. We're focused, he said, on simply building the best products. Finally, on Apple Intelligence, its new AI features, I asked him any updated timeline on when European and Chinese regulators approve Apple Intelligence. No updates, Kevin Perek said, to talk about right now. Guys, back to you.
Josh, there's one other thing I want to mention here that stands out to me, and that is a big new buyback authorization, which seems to acknowledge here, some of the troubles that the stock has had and some of the potential rockiness going forward. $100 billion buyback here that the company is authorizing. It's raised its cash dividend to 26 cents a share as well. So returning some of its still ample cash to shareholders, perhaps as a sort of carrot or an enticement to try to weather this period here. Did they have anything to say in particular about the decisions on that cash return?
So this is always the quarter when Apple does update its capital return program, right? So investors would be expecting that news. On that point, in the statement, CFO Kevin Perek does address that. Says our March quarter business performance drove EPS growth of 8%, $24 billion in operating cash flow. He says allowing us to return $29 billion to shareholders. He noted, Julie. All right, well, as we are continuing to listen here live to the Apple second quarter earnings call, let's bring in now Bob O'Donnell, TECHnalysis Research, LLC president, for more on the very latest. Bob, it's always good to see you. Let me get your quick thoughts, Bob, on the print, your reaction to the results, and then what we're hearing from the call. We'll mention Tim Cook just saying here right now, March quarter saw limited tariff impact. June quarter, not able to estimate the impact precisely. It's too uncertain, but for some color, he said, assuming current rates don't change, no new tariffs added, impact could add, he said, $900 million to costs for the June quarter. Your reaction, Bob?
Well, first of all, it was a great quarter, and it's great that Cook dealt with that question of pull-in versus not, because the hardware numbers in particular were very strong. I think a lot of people immediately assumed, and I even saw some initial write-ups that, that was based on tariff pull-in. Well, sounds like, according to what they're saying, it actually wasn't. So they did obviously make a bunch of adjustments. We all saw the stories about them flying in all kinds of iPhones from India in the perhaps concern that there would be additional tariffs. But look, net, they did very well. Services was slightly below what the street expected, but it's still a very solid number. And of course, that's their highest profitability business right there. So I think it sounds pretty good. He left open enough question marks moving forward that they've got some wiggle room. And yet at the same time, I think provided a little bit of security around, hey, this is where we think it's going to be. And I think all in all, it's not a bad number to be talking about.
So that $900 million number is what you're saying is that does not seem that damaging in terms of perhaps what people were expecting and what it does to Apple's business, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing 60 billion plus a quarter, right? So, I mean, it's not that it's nothing, to be clear, right? I mean, it's $900 million, right? But at the end of the day, for some of the real doom and gloom people who've said, oh, it's going to be a complete and utter disaster, I think you have to say, well, okay, yeah, it's not great, but theoretically it could be worse. Of course, we all know, unfortunately, it could be worse because if things change, then all of this gets thrown out the window. And that's the biggest problem, right? It's all the uncertainty we have that's putting people on pause for making a lot of big purchases, consumers and businesses.
It's interesting, Bob, when Cook started the call, the way he was highlighting the supply chain, the diversity of that supply chain. What did you make of CFO Kevin Parekh's comments to the Journal talking about this, saying the company expects that a majority of iPhones sold in the U.S. in the June quarter will come from India, and a majority of its other devices sold in the U.S. this quarter, including iPads, Macs, Watch, AirPods, will come from Vietnam. Your thoughts on those comments?
Well, look, Apple has been very clear about their shift from China to other Southeastern and Asian countries, including India, Vietnam, et cetera, for a while, right? And so that's not really a big surprise. Perhaps the percentage is where the surprise is. But again, we saw they airlifted things. It shows they have the ability to move some critical manufacturing to other places. Obviously not to the U.S. yet, and that's a whole separate discussion, but they can clearly move some of this out of China, which I think is important because we are going to look for a world where we need to have more geographical diversity from a supply chain perspective in the tech industry in general, and Apple's leading the way in that regard. Now, the question becomes, well, wait a minute, all these Southeast Asian countries also got hit with huge tariffs, which kind of actually in some ways helps China. So, we still need to get some clarification on how the tariffs are going to work in different parts of the world. But clearly, I think Apple sees that they need to move some of this stuff. They had started this process a while ago. None of these kinds of changes, by the way, happen overnight. They don't happen in a quarter. They don't happen in a year. They take several years. And Apple's been working on Indian manufacturing for several years. Same with Vietnam. So all of these changes are things that have been in motion and now are being accelerated. And it makes perfect sense. And I think we'll see it continue.